So, final exam is going to cover units 1 through 4. Same format as your quizzes, but it's longer. So you have an hour and 50 minutes to go through and complete it. This 35 points thing, based off of my math, is wrong, and so it's just a typo from carryover. I believe it is actually 50 points, so it is worth slightly more points than your regular quizzes, which I think makes sense considering you have more time to complete it. And as such, I believe it's 5 questions. I'm about to say 50 questions. It's five questions where your regular quizzes have been 4. Okay? I got to get clarity on the open notes. I think that's also an incorrect holdover. For sure, bring your calculator. I'll talk about that in just a second. As far as the open notes go, I do have to get clarity on that. My recommendation across the board, which is I think been fairly consistent, is that I think notes are a bad idea, and that whenever I've seen notes used, the averages are lower. Okay? So like consistent same tests I've offered and said, okay, we can have open notes this time around, and the average drops. The smallest drop I've seen is 10%. The largest drop I saw was 50% on average when notes were allowed. So I think notes are a bad idea based off of my empirical evidence, just because I think that doesn't mean that's true everywhere. Okay? So if you're going through and using notes, you should be spending some time thinking about the process of what should go into those notes. So what you might go through and do is start working through your previous quizzes and be like, oh, I didn't know this part. If you didn't know that thing, write that down as a thing that should go onto your note sheet. And so all the stuff that you didn't know to answer a question, that should show up on your note sheet. That's kind of a big deal. Does that make sense? Calculator. I've not been super strict about it and probably shouldn't be reporting this fact that I wasn't that super strict about it. On monitoring Desmos for the final, I will be super strict on it. So if you were using Desmos, that is perfectly acceptable and okay, because that's what I think I was told. So we're just going to assume that was the case. But it needs to be in test mode. If it's not in test mode, I will disrupt your time during the quiz to get you to download Desmos test mode and activate it as the appropriate form. Okay? So just be aware of that. Regardless of what calculator you decide to use, you should be practicing all your practice leading up to the final should be using that calculator so that you're used to that process, you're used to how to use it and manipulate it, and you're not getting bogged down in the use of the calculator instead of actually solving. Does that make sense? You will have a periodic table, and you do have an equation sheet provided. This kind of goes back to the note sheet. So I think your class at least noted it, and I believe the Monday, Wednesday class also had the same issue. I think the issue with bringing note sheets is we tend to hyper-focus on the most recent content, and we forget about older content. Okay? Here you're looking at the semester course, so everything shows up. So when we looked at that last quiz, we had that issue of what is pH. I don't remember how to solve for it. That's kind of a big deal, particularly because if we look at the formatting for every single quiz that pH was first brought up in, almost everything is brought in as a P form. Okay, so pH, pKa's. So really understanding what that is or knowing what that is a valuable thing to have memorized so that you aren't constantly looking it up. Okay, kind of makes sense? So there's things like that that I think could improve your speed and efficiency through the exams. Time has never really been an issue for the class from what I've seen so far. So maybe that's why you haven't felt pressure to do that. Okay, that's okay, I get it. But again, this content, depending on your path, may show up again. Okay? So notes, I've got to figure out what the deal is with that. I would assume at this point it's one sheet of notes, same as all of the other tests. Okay, so you only get one sheet coming through. You don't get to bring your extra periodic table because you have a periodic table. It's one sheet, okay? And I'll be holding real tight to that as well. Yes?
Will the periodic table have like the Roman numeral charges on there? Or no?
Flip to the last page in your quiz. Yes, yes it does. I would assume it's going to be the same table. If it's not, well, then I'll go through and hand draw numerals on everybody's test real fast. Yes?
So what notes are, we're gonna still
I think you're still going to be, at a minimum, I think you're still going to be allowed one sheet of notes. Okay?
As like
So I would start that plan moving forwards with the possibility that you get more, but I don't know what more is.
as like I remember correctly, because I know I had Carly last semester, she
Yeah.
did front and back, because since it was like 4, I don't
I've-
remember for fully though, so.
That's kind of where I would lean to, so I wouldn't be surprised if she comes back and says it's 4 sheets, one per quiz. So yeah, at this point, since I don't know, I'd stick with one. And I would argue, again, you're looking at an instructor that prefers no notes, your note sheet should be as lean, as slim as humanly possible. If you've got 4 sheets of notes, that's 8 pages you're rifling through to try and answer a question. That's
I
gonna
meant
be
just one
challenging.
case. I meant one paper in front of that she did not last time.
Oh, she didn't give, oh, okay, I thought you were saying she
it was,
got one for
I
each.
can't remember if it was, it still was one sheet, but I just
Yeah.
can't remember if she said one side or front and back.
I would bet front and back, to be honest. It's too hard to police. Does that make questions, or does that make questions? Does that make sense? Do we have any questions?
What is the study guide for that?
Good question on the study guide. You already have it. Take it. Quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3, quiz 4. Staple them together. Ta-da! Study guide. The emphasis was probably a little bit different than what I just gave, but that's what she told me to take, more or less.
There's not gonna be like.
There's no extra study guide. So you've got tons of questions within Alex that you can go back to. Remember, Alex gives you a review function, so you can go back and target certain areas that you have weaknesses in to try and improve those areas. I would argue where you should be going is back to the quizzes. Those match the format of how she presents things and what she's already considered important emphasis within an individual unit. Right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that too, I think, here. Yeah. Yeah. So studying for the final. So we'll try and review the major concepts. Most of this is going to come down to what you want through these last 2 days, because you get today and you get tomorrow, and then we're not tomorrow, Thursday, and then we're done. There's officially no more lecture time. You don't have to see me again up to the final. I would encourage you to come to office hours and get help, right? Because I can help target why you're getting questions wrong and help you navigate that. Looking at answer keys doesn't help that. Most people, when they look at the answer key, try to reverse engineer how to get the answer. That's phenomenal for that question. But if the question changes, you're up a creek, right? And you have no way to navigate around that because your only way to solve was looking at the answer, right? So what you would need to do is go through and solve, set up work, and have someone critically evaluate the work process that you went through. Okay, so you could look at an answer and say the final answer you got was wrong, and then be done. Okay, now it's what did you do wrong in the work? Right? And that could be a simple mistake. A simple mistake can be pointed out. It can be a massive conceptual mistake. Right? You won't know that because you're not an expert in the field. Depending on the tutors, sometimes the tutors can help you nitpick your work. Right? But that is something I actually pride myself in, is nitpicking the hell out of everybody's work. Right? And actually trying to find out where you have weaknesses. Right? Which maybe you would know if you talk to me at the tutoring center. Right? And I can help you fill those gaps to ensure you got it more correct. Outside of the class, you have your homework problems. There are several paper homework problems. You've got your old quizzes, and you have Alex. Okay, so you should go through your individual quizzes, and I would highly encourage that you use Alex, because Alex has that little pie chart thing that tells you where you have weaknesses, which if you don't know how to read, you can be like, Mike, I need help, and then I will have to go find help to figure out how to read it and come back to you.
Is there a way I can get my quizzes back because I turned them into you from the retake?
So you should have been getting them back constantly. The only quiz you shouldn't have back at this point would be quiz 3, and I'm working on getting that graded. So hopefully that will be graded by Thursday. In fact, I think I'm going to have to say it's going to be graded by Thursday and get it back to you. This week sucks. But yes, that will happen. And if you're missing quizzes, there's a few I think I still have floating around, but I think I've tried to get them all back. I think the few I've got are from people who dropped. Use Canvas, because Canvas has a bunch of stuff, resources. And then this kind of ties to the point here. When doing practice problems, don't look at the answers. Right? Focus on getting your work done first. That says blank quizzes are posted. I honestly don't know the truth of that statement. I don't think I've seen them yet. When I ask about how much you're allowed for notes, I'll go back and ask about blank quizzes. Explain your answers, how you solved the problem, and what that answer means. That usually means talking to somebody who doesn't know something. Okay? As you're going through this process of doing all that practice, that's where you should be like, to answer this question, I needed this piece of information. To provide this explanation, I needed this connection. That should be your notes as you're navigating it. Once you've done your review of those 4 quizzes, you can then double back, look at your notes, compare them to your note sheets, and decide what things to keep, what things to get rid of. Kind of make sense? Which I think takes us to this slide, and Monday shut me down pretty fast, so you guys might do as well. What I would argue you should be going through and doing is looking at those 4 units, in particular those 4 quizzes, as best as you can. You currently don't have quiz 3. Like I said, I'll remedy that. But you should be targeting each of those quizzes. Each of them has 4 questions on it. Look at those 4 questions. Okay? Then look at the next quiz and the 4 questions. Do you notice any content that's showing up the same in both places? Right? If you're seeing that, that's content that's paralleled all the way through the course. What's the point of the final? To highlight all the content that an individual instructor thinks is critical to a student knowing by the end of the course. So if you're seeing it connect all the way through, that's probably a very high value question. You should ensure you know how to do that because you're likely to see it on the final. Does that make sense? All right? So when you're reviewing, look through those patterns. All right? If you don't see those patterns, that's okay. Double back to each of those quizzes and say, which question do you think is the most important? Right? Do you feel we talked about it more in class? Did it show up in maybe the lecture slides, not necessarily in the homework questions? Right? If you're seeing those connections, again, high value, you're increasing the probability of repeating those questions. Okay, why? All instructors, everybody, including you as well, are inherently lazy. And so what we're going to do is try to match what we've already done with the minimal amount of work. So we'll make edits to it, but we're going to try and minimize the amount of extra work that we have to go through and do. Does that make sense? So you should be focusing and thinking like someone who's trying to instruct the class and decide what things are the most important all the way through. How do I tie those things back? How can I ensure that students have actually learned those concepts, particularly through the past units? Kind of, sort of? Right. Where I started to go on Monday was looking at this particular slide and saying what things jump out. So when you hear kinetics, what does that mean? What are equations? What are concepts? What are things that you should be looking at? What are those things? Where are those things have value? Right? After we got through most of discussing the kinetics, the majority of the class said we didn't like doing this and just wanted to move on to the rest of the slides within this presentation, which is now navigating into problems. Right? So instead of going through something that you don't want to do you want to just jump straight into questions, or do you want to talk about what things we think stand out as important within the individual units?
I personally want to go over that slide.
Go over this slide. Okay. Since the rest of the class kept their mouth shut, you get to win.
Cool.
Right. So we'll go through that slide. Before we go through it, the one last thing I want to address, do you have any questions about quiz 4? Because we do officially have a retake on quiz 4. It'll be due by the end of day next Thursday. Right? Which is, and by end of the day, end of my day. So I will be on campus next week. Monday is going to be 7 to 4. But Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be 9 to 4, or I'll be available 9 to 4. Maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, but reliably those times. Right? Unfortunately, I'm opening up retake possibilities while I'm currently in a final exam, right? Which means I don't know where I will be. Right? So if you're going to come in for a retake, you're going to have to send me an email to say, hey, this is when I want to do it. Where are you going to be? So that I can do it. Does that make sense? Right. So that's the deal with the quiz 4 retake. There is no final exam retake. Right. When is your final exam? It is next Thursday, and I believe it starts at 8. It's 9. Okay. Starts at 9. So 9 to 10:50. So you guys get a little bit of, actually no, because we started at 10, right? So you're starting an hour earlier. Right, that's an important difference to note. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions about the Unit 4 quiz? Yes, sir.
4A. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's probably the last my opinion.
No, it's okay.
I thought indium would make a better semiconductor because it's closer to silicon than cadmium.
So the closer part becomes important, but it's what aspect do we talk about closer with? So when we're, and I can't record this because it's a quiz. Kind of a review here. When we're talking about kinetics, what was kinetics? Rate, okay, or speed. How do we calculate a rate? So, and this becomes the hard one. We've got a lot of things that are confusing. It is not products over reactants. Products over reactants is equilibrium. Okay, which is going to come in with K, capital K, products over reactants. Rate equals K, but you just said not K, not capital K. It's rate lowercase k. Lowercase k, what else is going to determine your rate? The rate constant and? What? Okay, what's going to determine the rate? Okay, what are the odds that you will ever find a spouse, significant other in the future? You're like, knowing me, it's going to be 0. Right? Well, if all you do is sit in your room and never reach out to the outside world, are you ever going to find a significant other? No, the odds of finding one is going to be slim to none. But if you go out and talk to more people, what happens to your odds? They should theoretically improve. Okay? And then you'd have to change maybe, other aspects behind that. And what you're looking at is effectively collision theory. The more your reactants collide, the faster your reaction. So when we're looking at our rate, it's dependent on the concentration of your reactants. That's your first kind of baseline. Okay? Within that, if you have multiple reactants, you have to include all of those reactants. Okay? We're going to call that reactant A and reactant B. Are all reactants made the same? No. How do we determine that? That's the order. Where's the order found? It's the exponent, the upper right-hand corner for those. That exponent will sometimes look like the coefficient from a balanced chemical equation. However, that is insanely misleading because it is never officially that. Okay? That order is determined one of two ways. Experimental. This is where you're comparing multiple experiments and saying how does the rate change when one reactant is held constant. Vaguely sound familiar? Okay? Or mechanistic. The mechanistic approach, you define it. You say, this is the rate. Because you've defined it, you get to decide what the order is. Okay? You're defining it by how your mechanism works. How do those individual particles come in and collide with each other? Okay? You define that. Just because you define it, does that mean you're right? Nope. So how would you discover if you were right? Trial and error only works if you have something to compare against. You have to compare it against the experimental. Okay? So you double back to the experimental results and say, does the mechanism match with the experimental? Good, very gentle, nice. Good dismount. Okay? You missed this, but you got the rest. Thank you. Okay? That's part of that rate law expression. What's the other thing that comes in with determining K, or the important thing with our rate constant K, and we'll end there. It has nothing, it's not that it has nothing to do with equilibrium, but it is not equilibrium, and don't confuse it with that. What's factored into K? Yes, the units change depending on your rate law expression. Just because I have two reactants, do I actually get a product? No. What things factor into that?
Activation.
Temperature. Temperature is important because that's going to control whether or not the products can clear the activation energy. Do they have enough energy to actually make the product? So that's looking at our activation energy. I don't know how to spell activation energy, and no one wants to hang out and listen to me talk anymore. So we'll kind of let everybody go, but that's our EA. Things that we need to know for EA, where do we calculate it from? The Arrhenius expression. That says Arrhenius, and the other thing that we need to be responsible for is knowing where it is on a graph. That's the difference between our transition state and our reactant energy. Okay? All of those were big important pieces that came out of the kinetics chapter. Okay? We can continue to have this conversation on Thursday, thank you. Or we can start working into practice questions. And we've got a whole bunch of practice questions that we could look at.